20 to 8 now. Good morning. You are listening to Breakfast here on 5 Live this morning. And MPs have accused Labour of failing to deal properly with allegations of anti-Semitism in the party. They've attacked Jeremy Corbyn for not providing adequate leadership in addressing the issue. The Home Affairs Select Committee, which includes 3 Labour members, claims the Labour leader has failed to fully appreciate the distinct nature of contemporary anti-Semitism. However, Mr Corbyn claims the report was biased against Labour and uses the issue of anti-Semitism as a weapon. Gideon Falter chairs the campaign against anti-Semitism and contributed to the report. Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you believe Labour does have, I think you used the phrase anti-Semitism in its midst?
Well, it absolutely does. And the report attacks Jeremy Corbyn very directly. It says we're not persuaded that he fully appreciates the distinct nature of post-Second World War anti-Semitism, and that he's shown a lack of consistent leadership on the issue, which has created what they call a safe space for those with vile attitudes towards Jewish people. And the report's absolutely scathing also about the Chakrabarti inquiry, which he instigated. And Jeremy Corbyn's statement this morning shows that he's still absolutely determined to fight the anti-Semitism of the Holocaust and workplace discrimination, whilst ignoring Labour's abject failure to tackle anti-Semitism in its midst. And he shows that he's learned nothing at all by brazenly holding up the discredited Chakrabarti whitewash of a report as a model for fighting anti-Semitism, which for us shows exactly the problem in Labour. People call themselves anti-racist campaigners and see that as a way of inoculating themselves against criticism, whilst in the case of people like Ken Livingstone, very articulately and repeatedly and determinedly pushing out the sort of lines that are extremely offensive to Jewish people.
So many things you've just said there. We could talk about all of those things. I want to go back to the beginning, if I can, with the one thing you said. And you used the phrase about the distinctive, failing to understand the distinctive nature of post-Second World War anti-Semitism. And that seemed to be in the key of your argument. I mean, can you explain a bit what you mean by that? Is it when criticism of Israel as a state sort of spills over into anti-Jewish criticism? Is that what you mean? Is it a sort of a lack of care around language at its very basic level? I mean, can you explain?
Yes, sure. I mean, there is a fine line as to criticism of the state of Israel and criticism of the Jewish state as a way of criticising Jewish people. And generally speaking, what we see comes nowhere near the fine line. What we see instead is a kind of argument which is calling the Israelis the new Nazis, which is saying that the state of Israel should be completely destroyed.
And these are phrases coming from within the Labour Party.
Exactly. And so it's not really a lack of care. It's more that I think probably Lord Sachs said it the best, when he said that they used to hate us for our religion, and then came the Renaissance and they could no longer hate us for our religion, so they hated us for our race. And then came the Holocaust and they could no longer hate us for our race, so they hated us for our state. And I think that he makes a very compelling argument. Criticism of Israel is absolutely valid. Of course it's valid. It's a democratic state, and in fact, criticism of Israel happens plenty within Israel. But that's not what we're seeing in the Labour Party, and indeed on the far left in general. And that's why what this report does, which is so important, is it introduces endorsement for the international definition of anti-Semitism, which is already in use by the College of Policing. And it says that definition, which has been adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, by the US Department of State, by the EU Parliament, it says that now needs to be adopted by the UK government and, crucially, by political parties as well.
What is that definition?
It's on our website. It's actually a fairly long definition.
Oh, okay.
It's antisemitism.uk/definition. But what that says is it points out all of the classic anti-Semitic tropes from those used by the Nazis onwards, through to the very modern day sort of things that we've been seeing coming out of the Labour Party, to a limited extent as well from the Liberal Democrat Party as well. And we think that would be extremely powerful. Now, obviously, the proof is in the pudding. The National Union of Students has been using that definition for some time. But their president, Malia Bouattia, has also come in very directly for criticism in the report, because she's completely failed to adhere to that definition. So, of course, adopting the definition is one thing, enforcing it is another, but it's hugely important that it's in there. And I suppose it will be very interesting to see what's done with that definition, because one criticism we would have of the report is that it's not sufficiently condemnatory of the Crown Prosecution Service. Last year, anti-Semitic crime in the UK reached a record high, 26% rise in anti-Semitic crime, 51% rise in anti-Semitic violence.
I just wanted to ask you about that. We don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, but I wanted just to ask you about Jeremy Corbyn's response. He said there's a disproportionate emphasis on Labour in this report. You've just raised a really important point. 26% increase in hate crime against Jews. 1 in 20 adults in the UK, this report shows, could be characterised as clearly anti-Semitic. 75% of anti-Semitic language comes from the far right. Is there a disproportionate emphasis on Labour in this report, in your view?
I think that the far right was seen as a spent force in the UK for a long time, and I think it is resurgent now. It should be extremely concerning to us, and it must not be allowed to re-establish its foothold. But within the Labour Party, there's been a very worrying and very public trend, and far-left anti-Semitism is now just as worrying, if not more worrying, than far-right anti-Semitism, as long as Islamist, extremist anti-Semitism as well. So we have these sort of three strands of anti-Semitism, far right, far left, and Islamist, which are all actually converging on the same ideas about Jews. And although far right, far left, and Islamists can't agree on very much, the one thing they do agree on is their hatred of Jews, and those three strands need to be fought equally. And for Jeremy Corbyn to try to deflect attention back to the far right shows that he just doesn't get it.
Gideon Falter, thank you very much indeed. Jeremy Corbyn has given us a statement. It says anti-Semitism is an evil which led to the worst crimes of the 20th century. Every one of us has a responsibility to ensure it's never allowed to fester in our society again. The report's political framing and disproportionate emphasis on Labour risks undermining the positive and welcome recommendations made in it. Under my leadership, Labour has taken greater action against anti-Semitism than any other party and will implement the measures recommended by the Chakrabarti report to ensure Labour is a welcoming environment for members of all of our communities. And we're going to talk more on this.